But I think the image of Jesus dying on the cross is a pretty good representation, actually, of that process and of what God is and how we come in contact with him.
Okay, welcome to the Reason and Reverence channel. My name is Connor O'Leary, and today I have a special guest with me, Mark Derian. Mark is a therapist. He's based out of Los Angeles, and I've known Mark for a few years. We met through Twitter, and I've always been very impressed with his work. Mark is a graduate of the Ohio State University. Is that correct? With a BA in philosophy,
Yep.
and I've heard has enough credits for a PhD at Columbia, but was kicked out for having radical ideas that were a challenge to the psychology establishment. That's the story I've heard, at any rate.
Yeah, that's my story. I mean, they would tell
Yeah.
you a different story. They would
And
say, we don't think he's going to be a good psychologist someday. So we don't
that's,
want him associated with this university at all. That's what they would say.
well, we'll get to that. We'll get to more about your background and your story. Mark has also authored a book, which I recommend everyone get. It was transformative for me. Mark has a unified theory of psychology, which, as far as I know, has never been done before. It lays out the fundamental principles of the field. So I think someone said that Mark is the Aristotle to Jung's Plato. I don't know, that might be too high of praise. I don't want to put too much
Ooh.
pressure on you there, Mark.
Yeah, I'm getting really uncomfortable over
Uh,
here.
uh,
Aristotle's a really smart guy, so I don't
yeah.
know.
No,
I
I'm
would say Jung is the Socrates
Jung is
of
the Socrates.
of
Okay.
psychology. Yeah.
Jung is the Socrates. Okay.
So that would make me the Plato. I
I'm gonna
actually
have a
think
bus.
Plato's probably
Yeah.
smarter. I mean, if you're gonna, we can't go back and do IQ tests, but I would bet that Plato's smarter than Aristotle. But
Really?
um,
Well, Aristotle built off of Plato, so he had a foundation to start with.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, probably
So,
don't want to start talking about Plato and Aristotle too soon. I
no.
like the title though, Reason and Reverence.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. So Mark and I will be discussing today. We're going to talk about religion, and we're going to talk about specifically the relationship between religion and psychology, which is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart because I was raised a very devout traditional Catholic, and what I was basically taught growing up, implicitly, if not explicitly, was that if you are a good Catholic, you go to mass and you do the right things, you don't really need psychology. You don't really need it. And there was a lot of suspicion about psychology, that it was a secular attempt to replace religion, and so there's a lot of skepticism. And I found out, much to my chagrin, that I really did need psychology, and that my practice of religion really was not enough. So we're going to talk about that topic, and I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. And welcome on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, I think about these things all the time anyway, so I might as well talk with somebody about it.
Yeah. So before we get into the meat of the conversation, um, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about your background and how you got into psychology as a field?
Hmm. Well, I'm definitely more of a philosopher. I mean, like I think you said, I majored in philosophy in undergrad, much to my parents' chagrin. Um, so I'm really more of a philosopher than anything else, and I just kind of saw psychology as a way to be a philosopher. I'm trying to be useful too. I'm trying to do something useful, so I thought maybe psychology would be a good way to go for me. And working as a writer in advertising wasn't really working out.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what got me here. But yeah, I guess I just like I got into young too in college, and that really helped a lot. That really helped shape things. And yeah, I too I don't come from a Catholic background. I'm more of a Protestant background and not very serious. I mean, I wasn't really made to believe one thing or another, but uh, I could never really reconcile it, what everybody was talking about when I was in middle school and high school in church. Because I was reading about the founding fathers at that time, and I was thinking, like that what they did was way more important than this guy Jesus and he died for me. What that doesn't really make sense. And but Jung really helped me to put it together. But yeah, I like ideas. I like talking about them, and psychology is a new field that I don't think isn't even a field yet, technically. I mean, that's what I'm trying to work on. So figured maybe this is a good place for me to be useful.
Right. So your work is focused on the fundamental principles, laying out the fundamental principles of psychology, right?
Yeah, I mean, laying out the fundamental principles, but also how those apply in therapy. Like, I tend to get lost in abstraction, but I really want to bring it back to, very specific things that people can do. And I think that's, w once you look at principles more fundamentally, it actually clears up. It makes the day-to-day working as a therapist, it makes it more specific and more concrete.
Right.
And it makes it easier too. Because when you
Yeah,
have a
well,
field
well,
laid out in principles, then you're really just focusing on a few principles, and that's it. It doesn't really make it, like I say, it doesn't make it easy, but I do think it's a simple process of growth, which is
right.
what
You're
people
not
have been trying to codify for, thousands of years. I mean, this is what the Hermetics were doing. This is Gnosticism. They're trying. I mean, this is Egyptian rituals trying to codify this process of how do you change? How do you turn the base metals that are your unconscious issues into the gold that is your identity. And we've been trying to wrap our minds around this and come up with different language for doing it. Religion, Christianity, Catholicism is one way of doing it that means a lot to people. And I'm doing my way. I don't think they're mutually exclusive or anything like that. So, which is probably what we're going to be talking about, hence the title of the
yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. Well, so let's dive in a little bit more to that. Um, so I think before we get started, we should do what all good philosophers do. We should define our terms.
Right.
So so how do you, when we're talking about religion, what do you mean by religion when we talk about that?
Um, by religion, I would I would put in the context of spirituality and spirituality is creating a relationship with some other world. I mean, whether that world is literal, whether it's figurative or metaphor, it is creating with a relationship with some other world that is ultimately in charge of this one, that takes precedent over this material world. And spirituality is about currying favor, gaining access, having insight to, relating with that spiritual world. So life in this realm is easier for you. It's more simple. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of different things to pay attention to in this world. Like, you know, the sun rises every day. I'm going back to what our hominid ancestors were thinking about when they were developing this stuff. And the sun rises every day, and the wind blows at different directions each day. And do those matter? Does the relationship between those matter? Maybe it doesn't. And religion or spirituality is an attempt to overcome, the seeming chaos of the material world. And I would just say religion is a codified spirituality. It's saying, I mean, kind of like what you're talking about with Catholicism, which is do this, don't do that, go to mass, say a prayer this way. And these are the specific things that can get you in touch with this spirit world, God, heaven, the world of forms, the Platonic world of forms. I would say, and Jung would say it's your unconscious.
Okay, so basically religion is just a structured form of spirituality.
Yeah, I think very
Yeah.
much so. It's a structured form, and a lot of it's really good. I mean, me not being religious myself, but I think there's a reason that people still go to mass, even though we a lot of them probably believe in all the scientific advancement that's going on around us, because it means something, and those symbols are important. And the Jung talks about this a lot, and I think these ideas are becoming more popular. People are able to see religion in this from a psychological context. Also thanks to Jordan Peterson, I think he's done a good job.
I
Although
was
I
gonna
have a lot
say.
of disagreements with him, I kind of view him as like the CrossFit of psychology. Like I would never do CrossFit, But now when I go to a gym, like all gyms have like lifting platforms. And I think that's because of CrossFit.
Yeah.
And so now like people are talking about Jung again, and I think that's because of Jordan Peterson. I don't I don't know if I agree with anything he says too much. I don't even know what he's saying half the time, but yeah, jokes aside. Anyway.
Yeah, well, he's the one who got me into Jung. I mean, he's the one who really, I think, brought Jung back into into popular culture in a way that I don't think he was there before.
He really did, but I think something was also going on in like the ether, or the collective unconscious, whatever you want to call it. I don't have that exact interpretation of it, but um because in my dissertation I was referencing Jung and talking about dragons, and then like the next month about like Jordan Peterson got popular and was talking about dragons and like reining in your dark side and what it represents. And I'm like, oh, those are the look, you gotta see anyway.
I think there's a phenomenon. I think there's actually documented phenomenon that advancements or unique ideas they pop up around the same time, independent of each other. They tend to do that historically.
Which makes sense because I think culture or the milieu or whatever the zeitgeist, it's the same for everybody. And the next
Right.
step is like is going to be,
It's
people are going to see
logical.
the next step because we're all part of the same thing. Like we're all in the same business of building the zeitgeist, and we're all part of it. So we all see the same thing anyway. So I don't think it's just like some mystical thing, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's not mystical. It's causal. It's just causality, and it may be hard to tease apart the causality because it's so complex. But you don't have to invoke mysticism to explain that.
Yeah. But if you want to, and that means something to you, then okay. Who am I to tell
So,
you not to not do that? As long as you're not claiming to be a scientist.
so do you think that, you say things like that in your videos a lot, where it's like, well, if you want to be, I'm an atheist, but if you want to believe in religion, if you want to believe in these things, that's fine. Do you think that anyone could credibly accuse you of subjectivism or relative or moral or intellectual relativism when you say that?
Uh, yeah, if I was a philosopher, but I'm not. I'm a guy who talks about psychology. So I mean, psychology is subjective. It is baked into the field. It is based on you, the subject. And that's what it's about. It's about relating with yourself. And if you can come up with symbols or metaphors to help you relate with yourself and relate with the world as a consequence, then please do that. I mean, if you can go to church and it helps in some way, uh, then then great. I just want you to be able to put your own words to it and maintain whatever identity you have when you go to church. That's really the thing. I mean, the question everybody's talking like, I mean, that's this thing with atheism and Richard Dawkins and to reference Jordan Peterson, those debates. So I guess it's been several years between, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson going back and forth. Like, does God exist? I don't think that's the relevant question. I think the relevant question is, what is God? What is your relationship with God? Those are the things that we need to talk about. From a psychological standpoint, God exists. It's a fact. I mean, I think that's when Jung was asked, "Do you believe in God?" He said, "I don't believe. I know." And I think what he was talking about is the phenomenon of if we just have cultural amnesia next tomorrow and nobody knows what religion is, we will start developing an idea of God very soon. We will start having marriages very soon where you like stand in front of your community and proclaim your love. We wouldn't call it a marriage. We wouldn't call it a wedding. Maybe we wouldn't have cake, maybe. I don't know, but we would have something like some wedding service. These things are in us. And that's what Jung was talking about. Like, reverence. It's in us to have reverence.
Okay, so I want to go a little bit deeper on that because I know some people listening are going to be like, well, what do you mean? You know, it's different psychologically. So what you're saying is there an issue with if you believe something that is, let's say, false in reality, in just physical objective reality, it doesn't exist there,
Hmm.
and let's say for the sake of argument, that's God, doesn't exist. But you believe in God and you create a psychologically healthy relationship with your conception of God, however we're defining psychologically healthy relationship. That is that equally, is that as good as, let's say, not believing in something that doesn't exist, um, and creating a healthy relationship with that aspect of your psyche outside of that? Are you saying those things are as good as each other?
No, I don't think they're as good as each other because, stress puts us in situations where our beliefs really get tested. And, it feels like every other day or something, like some religious guy is on Twitter talking about how he smoked too much weed and he met the devil and weed's bad. And look, I'm not a big drug guy, but
I
I
saw
think
that
if you
thread too.
smoke too much weed, even accidentally, and you meet the devil, I think you have some epistemological issues you need to figure out. I think you're just given a different mindset on things and you're realizing, wait, my belief in God is based on my belief in God. That's not real. I think that's what's going on. I would have to imagine, you know, you know, given the times I've smoked too much weed and have similar kind of thoughts. Not about that, but whatever. So no, I don't think it's as good, but I also understand where people are, and people can't let go of this idea of God, and it's totally makes sense. I wouldn't want you to. It's like, um, oh, you're married to your wife's an alcoholic, isn't that bad? Yeah, I guess. And if I had a magic wand to wave, I would make her not an alcoholic, but you're in this relationship with her for a reason. You're here. And then there was probably, and plus I know there's something about you that made you attract an alcoholic. So you got to stay in and work on those issues, right? And I think it is psychologically unhealthy to just say, not that you would never divorce your wife just because she's an alcoholic. That was probably the thing to do, but let's engage with this relationship as best we can. And when people come to me and they believe in God or they go to church or, whatever, I'm like, okay, it's not my job as a therapist to say what you should believe. My job as a therapist is to help you cultivate a better relationship with these things, whether it's your alcoholic wife, whether it's God, whether it's the priest. I mean, most of the time when people have a difficult time with religion, it's because they're not individuating themselves in the context of the religion, and it has nothing to do with the religion. It's like it's you're not approaching it in a very healthy way, and it's because of these psychological issues that you have. You're not integrating who you are into the church, and you feel lost, and you feel like it doesn't have any meaning. Like, yeah, well, that's because you're not really there. You're not really present in the relationship with the church or your wife or whoever.
I think that's to me that's very refreshing because I talk to people, I've talked to people on both sides of the atheism theism debate, and there are certain people on both sides of that who are, deeply convinced that they are right, and they they really view it as impossible for you to be a healthy person or a moral person unless you come over to their side. Like it's essentially impossible. And they really think that the best way to go about, fixing other people or fixing the world is to argue with people essentially, is to, get the right ideas out there and convince people philosophically, intellectually, of their position. And while I understand that, because your obviously your behaviors, your attitudes, the things that you do, and the health of your relationships, it all comes back to what you believe about reality. And the closer you are to having the correct beliefs about reality, the healthier relationship should be with it, I think. Um, so I understand that on one level, but I know people who uh, who have, gone from, let's say, religion to atheism, who are far less healthy, emotionally, who have much worse relationships than other people I know who are religious and who, are very devout. And so I think they're missing the psychological aspect of it, and they're missing that piece that you're talking about, where it's like, okay, you may not have all the right beliefs about reality, and few of us do, but let's create a healthier relationship with your emotions and with the people in your life and the organizations or institutions in your life. And that actually is more impactful than just trying to convince someone philosophically of, the rightness or wrongness of a particular position.
Yeah, I mean, it's about relating with people who disagree with you. And part of that relating is, yeah, really identifying what they're going through emotionally and seeing how you're probably going through the same thing. I mean, you have different beliefs, but you're just organizing the world a little bit different way. And yeah, you got to relate with other people and see what they're going through and connect. And even if they're wrong, it doesn't matter. I do think ideas matter. Um, but I don't like that word humble too much, but also it's good to be humble because yes, reality is out there. It does exist, but that doesn't mean you can see it clearly. And if you have psychological issues, then you can't see it clearly. And you can have the right ideas, but communicate them poorly. Often, you can have the right ideas about reality that somebody else told you, but are you using them to cover up insecurity? I mean, in my experience, a lot of people are, and this is nothing against the objectivism movement, but any like 9 out of 10 objectivists I come across on the internet are, I just it hits me in the face how unhealthy they are. And like the stuff they say to me, and I mean, just the meanest stuff I've ever heard from anybody online isn't feminist or like men's rights activists or anything like that, although they can both be pretty bad, but it's objectivists. Uh, and it's like, oh yeah, because you're using these ideas. And it's nothing against Rand or anything, like that. But you're using these ideas to cover up insecurity. That's what it seems like to me.
Well,
And
I mean,
and
I think
yeah,
people, I think people can do that with any idea, even if,
true.
like you're saying, even if it's a true idea. I mean, um, I've seen people do that. Many people do that in traditional Catholicism, where they become very dogmatic about their beliefs, and they're afraid to consider alternatives because even considering an alternative is a threat to their sense of psychological safety. And
Yeah,
um,
you're not allowed to doubt.
right, right, and so
So I
and
hear from movies. I don't know.
no, you're not. I don't want to get too much into my personal story, but I that was the thing that really eventually drove me out was this whole you're you're not allowed to doubt um, certain dogmas. They're enshrined in doctrine, and if you doubt them, if you deliberately doubt them, it's a mortal sin. Like you go straight to hell if you doubt this. And I remember, the rationalization for that was always, well, uh, you can question. So you could ask, how is this true? But you can never question that it is true. And I remember thinking, well, and they were like, well, that's, we're being reasonable. That's how we're being rational here. And I was like, well, if I can't question the conclusion, if the conclusion is foregone no matter what, then I'm by definition not being rational. Like if I can't consider the alternative, if I'm just going, well, how does this work? Then by definition, all I'm doing is rationalizing. I'm not
Yeah,
actually, um,
you're right.
but but yeah, I've seen people do that with many ideas, and even true ideas can be used as dogmas, which I think is what dogma is about. It's about covering up an insecurity.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of those. I mean, I just see, and this is why I think it's so important I would never want to get rid of religion, but I think it's so important for it to evolve to the next stage, whatever it's going to be, because it just seems like a lot of those doctrines in the Catholic Church were created when, like, what, 95% of the people were illiterate? It's like, it's not going to work anymore. This worked 500 years ago. Society's changed. We figured out some new things, and you need to evolve along with it. But I think, yeah, I mean, coming from like a very dogmatic perspective, you're not going to be able to evolve. And that's really unfortunate because there are a lot of people like me out there who would be receptive to these Christian ideas, But it was never communicated to me, that these are symbols and stories and meanings and archetypes until I picked up Jung. I had to pick up Jung on my own. I mean, we didn't learn that in school. I had to go find this guy. And it's like, okay, I only picked him up because I didn't have a girlfriend, right? It's like you can't rely on just like weird guys spurged out who don't have girlfriends to begin to figure out this and put it together. And I think religion just needs to become very good at communicating. It just needs to be better at communicating these ideas. And
Well,
people say, well,
that's
Mark, when you say God isn't literally true, that that lowers his importance. You're devaluing the idea of God, but you're not putting yourself from my worldview. I would say by making him concrete and a literal truth, you're devaluing the idea of God.
well, let me get your opinion on this then. So, this is again another reason that I ended up leaving Catholicism, which was, I took a very dogmatic approach. I had this very intellectualized approach, which was definitely a coping mechanism for not being able to deal with my emotions. And and so the dogma says, well, you must believe these things and you must approach these symbols in this way, and this is what they mean, and you're not allowed to have meanings outside of this that contradict it. And I remember talking to a priest, a friend of mine, and I remember going to him once and saying, I I feel like my practice of Catholicism is stunting my psychological growth. Like it's actually emotionally harming me. And because I feel like there are things that I should be doing, and ideas or possibilities and parts of my emotional life that I should be exploring, but I can't because the dogma tells me it's a sin to do these things. And so I feel like there's this wall up and I'm not growing. And his response to that was essentially he didn't say, "Oh, well, that you're just approaching it wrong." His response was, "Well, but it's true." But, historically, because Catholics believe that there's a historical argument for the church. So he's like, what? So he brought out the historical argument and said, well, we know it's true because of this, this, and this, and we know it's true because of this, this, and this. And it was basically like, how you feel emotionally doesn't really matter. It's what's true, rationally. And so it's very a
Hmm.
rationalistic approach. And I remember talking to a good friend of mine who had the same comment where I was like, I've been going to mass and the sacraments for years, in some cases, not just weekly, but more than weekly, in some cases daily. And I not only do I not feel like I've gotten better as a person, I feel like in a lot of ways I'm worse. And and I remember my friend getting really angry at me when I said that and being like, well, that's not what it's about. It's not about becoming a better person. And I was like, really? I mean, isn't that why we're all here? And he's like, no, it's not about that. It's about uh, believing what Christ said and doing what he told us. And then, we'll all be rewarded in the next life. But it really doesn't matter how bad you end up doing down here, as long as you hold on to all of that, then the rest doesn't matter. You'll be rewarded in the next life. So it's this mind body dichotomy, rationalistic approach. And it was another thing that drove me out. I was like, I can't. Everyone, you might say, oh well, it's not about being a better person, but everyone I know who is religious believes that, talks about it as if it's about being a better person. I mean, that's why my parents, who were agnostics, converted. And I'm just curious what you think of that phenomenon psychologically. Like when someone says that, oh, it's not about being a better person, it's just about believing the right things. What do you think is going on there psychologically?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that experience you went through is indicative of the fact that religion is never supposed to be a philosophy. It was a, it was a view of psychology, as a view of how man functions and relates with himself and other people. But I think, yeah, over the years, the church has turned into a philosophy. So it's taken these symbols and codified them and made them very specific, and it just takes the meaning out of it. Um, but yeah, I mean, living for another world, I mean, that's kind of a good tell of how healthy is your spirituality or religion? Is what is it asking you to do? Is it asking you to deny yourself or integrate yourself? And it sounds like, yeah, what you were going through, at least in that iteration of the Catholic Church, is there was a lot of denial in there. But yeah.
So it's interesting you say that religion was never meant to be a philosophy. How do you think religion started? What do you think the origin of religion was in human history?
Well, I have a just so story for that I always use. I mean, I just, I always say, imagine yourself with your tribe 40,000 years ago in present day Germany during the Ice Age, some glacial maximum or something, and your biggest concern is storms, right? Because a storm will come and you don't have a shelter. I mean, you have these tents, you're mostly nomadic, and these storms would come and you couldn't tell, you don't know when they're coming. Maybe the stars are in a certain place in the sky. When the stars get to a certain place, that's generally when the storms start. But this is how we get myths and everything. And myths are basically a retelling of stories that we would tell ourselves 40,000 years ago about the stars and what it meant, because it was very important to us. So I just imagine a scenario where we would project out something like storm gods, right? And then you would get together with your tribe. I mean, there's some evidence for this, but of course it's sparse. And you didn't have a name, but you would have like a little mark or something that indicates you or your family within the tribe. And you would put your little mark on this bone flute and you would play the bone flute with all your buddies to appease the storm gods. And I think that's really where it started because there were these things about reality that we couldn't control. Um, we didn't have the scientific method at that point. We couldn't tease apart cause and effect. I mean, maybe a little bit through observation, but that probably only worked about half the time. Eventually, you just get to this place like, look, we don't know what's going on, but we need to make sure that we're connected. We need to make sure we're in the best psychological headspace. So if a storm does come, we'll be able to handle it. And I think that's probably something to do with the first religious ritual is something like that. I think there's probably other things like uh, drugs probably had something to do with it. Dreams. I would just imagine people having the same dream in the same night, talking to each other the next day, and they both had an archetypal image in their dream, like a cross or something. And they're like, oh, really? Well, we got to start, building temples to this. And we need to put this symbol that we both have, we need to put it at the head of the temple because this really means something. And I think it was, I would imagine it would be something like that. And that's very functional. It helps connect you, to everybody in the tribe. It helps, you all believe the same thing. So when you're out hunting a woolly mammoth or something, you can all work together, which is very important. Um, yeah.
Interesting. So when I'm thinking about what you're talking about here, I'm going to bring this back to Ayn Rand, who I also am partial to. Um, she talks a lot about how man's means of knowledge is conceptual.
Hmm.
And when you talk about religion, you're basically saying, well, it's about creating a relationship with this world that we can't see in order to help us deal with the world that we can see.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. That's a good point.
yeah, and so it's basically it's an attempt to deal with the conceptual world
Right.
that's unique to us as humans,
Yeah.
because our means of dealing with the physical world, with the perceptual world, is conceptual.
Hmm. Yeah, it's an attempt to deal with the conceptual world before we had good ways of forming concepts or before we had the scientific method and everything and yeah, and before we had like words and ways of communicating. Yeah, exactly.
So part of that then, so we have partially replaced religion with science then, because science and an explicit understanding of concept formation and reason can replace that at least to some degree, right?
Well, I wouldn't call it replacing. I would call it improving by taking all the BS that religion claims to have precedent over and saying, well, actually, you don't have precedent over that. I think it's a way of purifying religion and turning it into this essential thing that I think people do need. And, Jung argues we have a religious instinct, and I think that's true. Like we have a sexual instinct, you don't, nobody, no, nobody taught you to like boobs, you just like them. Nobody taught you to have a religion, but you're going to have one, whether it's with the Catholic Church or, doing whatever your to-do list or your Wim Hof breathing or whatever, you're going to have one.
Right. So, but it sounds to me like, of course, religion initially was about dealing with what's out there. And then it also morphed into dealing with what's in here, what's inside our own minds, in our own psyches. And it sounds like, well, now that we have science and reason to deal with, you know, physics and engineering, um, religion is takes its more appropriate place in just dealing with being a way of dealing symbolically or ritualistically with our emotional life. Do you agree with that, or is that a good?
Yeah, it would be a way of calming ourselves down and feeling like we have some control over the world, even when we don't. That's if you mean emotionally by that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's all like these primitive people from thousands of years ago. I think that's all they were thinking of is like we just need to be calm, get on the same page, uh, and make sure that we're together. And playing this bone flute can be really, I mean, that could be really powerful. I mean, you have to imagine being there. That could be, and Jung talks about like I forget which Southwestern American Indian tribe. They'd have a guy wake up in the morning and beat a drum so the sun comes up,
Right, right.
right? And you have to imagine how powerful that is. And when you sleep in and the sun still comes up, everybody's like, "Ooh, you're lucky." You're lucky. You better wake up even earlier and be more committed to this. And that could obviously have a lot of meaning in your day and obviously give you a sense of calm and dignity and feeling like you have some kind of importance, like you matter. All these things that we can get in other ways, but again, before like science and before philosophy, we needed a way to do that just to calm ourselves down, like an anxiolytic. That's what it was. And I don't want to minimize that. I mean, we still need to do that, even however advanced scientifically, philosophically we are. We still need that to some degree because you just call the spirit world unconscious, and your way of dealing with it is through your emotions, and you realize, oh, I still need that. This is a never-ending process.
So, so that brings me to the main topic of this interview, which is, can psychology replace religion? Because all the things you're saying, well, it calms you down, it helps you manage your emotions, it brings people together, it gives you a sense of purpose and meaning. Doesn't psychology tackle all of those things? I mean, what's to stop someone from saying, well, I don't I don't need, Christianity or Judaism or whatever religion they practice. I can go through the right type of therapy and and create my own meaning and learn how to handle my emotions myself and develop my own symbols and my own rituals. Wouldn't that be a replacement for religion, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess technically, if you if you really take your psychology seriously, but also I would say, religion has a lot of symbols too, and they have, the Catholic Church has very good artistic expression of these things that really matter to us, and I would never want to denigrate that. Yeah, I think religion probably needs some psychology, but psychology needs some religion. And when you are trying to manage your emotions, you gotta realize that you're part of this process that we started 40,000 years ago when we're playing the bone flute to the storm gods. And you're doing the same thing now.
So are you saying that essentially if you cut yourself off from that multi-thousand year process and just say, all right, I'm going to start fresh, brand new, my own symbols, my own system, my own atheistic religion, if you will, are you saying that that's too shallow a well to draw in? Like it's better to go to an old religion that has, thousands of years of tradition and sort of adapt those symbols?
Well, I mean, what do you mean by better? I think it's very lonely doing that. I've tried to do things like that, and I've done pretty well. But you can't go living life thinking that, oh, all these Christians or all these Muslims or all these Jews are wrong. You got to go, what are they doing that I'm doing? Where's the overlap here? Where do we have similar concepts, but we use different language? They say God, I say reality. It's different, and I'm not saying, oh, it's just the same thing, but it's not as different maybe as you would think. Am I answering that?
I think
Or
so. I mean, it sounds to me like you're saying when you say that you can't just be like, oh, well, all of these billions of people are wrong. It sounds to me like you're saying it's important to develop, I mean, relationships with other people and not cut yourself off from them.
well, that's part of healthy emotional management
Right.
is relating with people, no matter what, no matter the circumstance. Um, that there's no, oh, but there's this one thing, and you can just, I mean, psychologically, you don't get to call anybody evil. It shows you don't understand something. Philosophically, maybe you can do that. Yeah.
So, what exactly do you mean by that? When you say psychologically you can't call someone evil, it shows you don't understand something.
Well, I mean, philosophy is about, well, what does man need to do to live in accordance with reality? There's this thing called ethics, right? You do this, you don't do that. Psychology, it's not about that. It's about just relating with other people and emotional attunement with others through yourself. And I feel like I'm not answering the question. Wait, could you ask that again?
Well, you said you psychologically you don't get to call someone evil, but maybe philosophically you do. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, it sounds like what you're saying is psychological or philosophically, you can say that this action is evil. And if you persist in this, you're behaving in an evil way. But psychologically, you can't say that. And it's not clear to me exactly why you can't say that psychologically. And I may be understanding you
I
wrong.
just think it's outside the confines of what psychology is. I mean, psychology is just about how you relate with yourself. I mean, you can do things incorrectly, but to call it evil. I mean, so I would argue evil is, yeah, I mean, psychologically, I don't think evil exists because I think if you're doing something evil, you really just don't know what you're doing, and there's some issues there that need to be cleared up. Now, philosophically, you don't deal with that thing. I mean, it's like it's this isn't. Yeah, it's just difficult when you're talking about this from using words like evil. I don't think this is any different than biologically, you can just speak of parts of the cell in terms of mitochondria and nucleus. But if you're asking a chemist, you don't get away with that. No, you got to look at how the molecules are actually interacting. And I think it's the same thing. I think philosophy or psychology, at least ideally, gets more granular about, yeah, you did something wrong. I'm not saying there isn't right or wrong, but why did you do it? What were the steps behind it? What were you going through? And I mean, you look at people who do the most horrible things. I mean, just unspeakable. It's scary because it's relatable. You're like, oh yeah, I have that thought process. Whenever I accept, poor behavior from myself, it's not to the same extent. I'm not equating us morally. I would never do that, but part of psychological health, I think, is identifying. identifying with people. It's like people talk about being a Nazi sympathizer. Like, yeah, I'm a Nazi sympathizer. I sympathize with everybody. You can
I'm just
see
going to
it.
cut that clip. I'm just going to cut that clip right there and just
Of
post it.
course. Yeah, right. That's okay. I've said worse things.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you're taking the Thomistic position, at least on this in this instance, where Thomas Aquinas says that everyone who does evil does so because they're pursuing an apparent good. And I remember listening once to
Hmm.
Jordan Peterson talk about this. He was talking, I think, to Bishop Barron, and he was, Bishop Barron was taking the, of course, traditional Thomistic position, which is, well, everyone pursues what they perceive to be the good, even the most evil people. And Jordan Peterson was saying, no, no, no. There are some people who know what they're doing is evil, know it's destructive to others, know it's destructive to themselves, and they pursue it anyway. So you would disagree with that. People don't do that.
I've no idea that doesn't exist. I mean, maybe, but I think that's between them and their priest or them and their therapist. I would never, no, I've never seen anything like that. And when people are doing things that really hurt themselves, they're getting some, secret gratification out of it. That they're covering up, some insecurity or something that really means a lot to them, or they just don't think it matters, for whatever reason. I mean, that there, it's not like a willingness to hurt. I mean, just think about it from this perspective. I mean, what if you went to a therapist and you're doing something wrong? You're just not studying enough for this chemistry exam, and you feel bad because your parents are paying for college. And he says, "Oh, well, you're just evil." That doesn't mean anything. I mean, what does that mean? That's not helpful. I mean, if I'm looking at a situation from outside of it, and I can look at like a suicide bomber and maybe call that evil in a certain context. But when that suicide bomber goes to the therapist and he's like, "Oh yeah, you're being evil. Don't be evil." Like, well, no, that's not why you're here. And you're here to get me to understand my behavior and what I'm doing. And you, the therapist, need to understand it too. Not agree, not like, but understand to see the process. And I think that's everybody's job, psychologically, to do that with as many people as you can. Not for them, not to be like some peace, hippie, oh, we're all the same, but just so you understand. You're not a suicide bomber, but I guarantee you do something. You have a very similar thought process as a suicide bomber. I mean, like you suicide bomb yourself and your family by like, drinking 10 beers on a Saturday night. That's a suicide bomber.
Yeah. I can see your point, and I'm curious though, um, if I look at my own psychological process, if I just observe, the empirical data I have internally, subjectively, that seems to make sense. I can't think of an example where I did something and I thought, this is destructive, it's purely destructive, and I just want to do it for the destruction. Like I personally can't think of that. I can think of many destructive things I've done, but only because there was some other benefit I was getting out of it. And so I think a lot of people look into themselves and they say, well, I've never done anything purely for the sake of self-destruction or destruction in general. So I can't imagine someone else doing it. And so when you say, well, no one is actually evil psychologically, that I want to agree with that, but I am wondering, do you think there's any empirical evidence that suggests that there are people who really, just want to watch the world burn? Or do you think that that's really just not a thing?
All right, unless like you have like some anomaly, like some tumor side, some baseball side tumor growing in your brain that's like pushing on your amygdala, baby. But no, and And look, I think this is beyond does that exist or does it not? And this is my criticism of Jordan Peterson. And yeah, he would say something like that. And my criticism is he's a philosopher who thinks he's a psychologist. And the fact that he would say that proves my point. He thinks he's talking about psychology, but he's not. He's talking about philosophy, maybe from a psychological context sometimes. But to say that, oh, people just want to watch the world burn. No, you don't understand something. And it really, I mean, look, if like some guy on the street says that, it's like, yeah, whatever, I get it why you would think that, but it just really makes me question Jordan Peterson and like what really makes up his beliefs. I don't think. I think he's one of those guys, if he smoked too much weed, he would just panic the F out. That's my take. I don't know. That's between him and his therapist, but and I think it's can be really harmful for a lot of guys to because it shows that he can only break down concepts so long. And I've criticized him for this. He talks about being responsible, which is true. It's good to be responsible. You're right. Thank you. But if you don't outline, if you don't take guys through the process of what responsibility is, how it happens, guys here be responsible. And it's kind of like he's smoking too much weed. They take on that extra weight and their psyches can't handle it and they just freak out. Things go really well for a couple weeks and they start, yeah, I'm responsible for my life. But when you have a lot of anxiety and you hear some guy who's your father figure because your dad's out to lunch and you take on those ideas, um, yeah, responsibility looks starts to look a lot like control and self-criticism and all these things that if like when you don't understand it, when you can't really break responsibility down, like you can't really break evil down and talk about like the fundamental pieces, like if a guy was a an architect and he didn't understand geometry, you'd be like, dude, like I'm not getting on the next bridge that you're building. You don't really understand what you're doing here. I think you're kind of just taking what this really smart guy said, Jung, and kind of crafting a bridge off of it, but it looks totally warped. In the context of, people saying like, oh yeah, you take a 5-year-old and give him hormone blockers and he turns into a girl. In the context of a culture that says that, Jordan Peterson looks really smart.
All right.
And you begin to overlook the fact that he's just copying this bridge from Jung, even though he doesn't understand the geometry. And you think, well, he's not arguing for hormone blockers, so he must be smart. And I think it's too bad because a lot of young men come across these ideas and they just hurt themselves with it.
Interesting. So would you say then the difference between philosophy and psychology is philosophy is the what reality is, what you are, what you should do, and then psychology is how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yep. There's a lot of different ways you can say it. That's a very good way. I would say it in the more pedantic, annoying way. Philosophy is relating with reality and psychology is relating with yourself.
I like that.
So you can in turn relate with reality. And you relate and you psychology and philosophy is relating with reality, so you can relate with yourself. I mean, they're really two sides of the same coin, and it's difficult to talk about one without the other. And I think that's a huge part of the split that we have. The mind-body dichotomy. You can call it a bunch of different things. The meaning fact dichotomy that we're going through in our culture is because we have not really delineated these two fields and how they're different. Um, but I think in order to do that, we first need to make psychology and therapy definite, definite fields. But because a lot of people like and look, it's the same thing that Plato did. Plato was a psychologist who thought he was a philosopher. And a lot of people who say like really stupid things politically, I guarantee you they're talking psychology. What they're saying is right, but they just need to be saying they're not saying it in the right context. You're not supposed to be in front of a lectern with, microphones in front of you. You're supposed to be in a therapist's couch talking about that. And it's correct there. And 100% yes, that is totally true, but don't, but that's not politics. You're not, we got to tease these two apart, you know?
Okay, so
It's
that's
just
very
like this
interesting. I
basic
want to.
confusion that we're going to. And like people look really stupid. And it's so easy and fun to call people stupid when they're talking psychology, when they think they're talking politics.
Okay,
But
so that's
it's
really
not
interesting.
true. So,
I
yeah.
I want to I want to make that really concrete for people because I think I know what you're saying there. But what's an example of someone in modern day culture talking about psychology, but they think they're talking about politics or philosophy? What's an example of that?
Oh, just like, referring to any political leader as like some kind of savior. First of all, a lot of race politics is that. It's like, like Black Lives Matter. You're trying to say your life matters. You're trying to say your life as a black person matters. But you're taking it into this political context where it doesn't belong. It belongs on the therapist's couch, you working out your issues with your race. Um, yeah, like,
Okay.
oh, Trump's elected, he's going to come save us. I don't want to sound like I'm, favoring one political aisle over the other, but we're one side of the political aisle. But yeah, like Trump's going to come save us. Yeah, it sounds like, you just have, like you think you need Trump to come save you and your civilization because you don't feel capable of doing that. You don't feel like your life unto itself really matters, or you can navigate certain elements of a society if Trump doesn't get elected. And I would argue, usually, I mean, not all the time, but usually, you're not relating with your father, and not literal father. It could be your literal father, but just that which represents authority to you. You don't really have full authority in your life, so you need somebody else to come in and take over and tell you to do things and implement, tariffs or something to protect you, or, whatever it is.
Right.
And that's what most of politics is. It's just taking unconscious issues, unconscious insecurities, and saying, "Oh, I can't do this myself. I need society to do it for me."
So
And
you're
this is me plagiarizing Jung in the discovery of the unconscious.
so you're projecting your issues onto society. So you're projecting, let's say in the instance of Trump, if you're a huge Trump supporter and you think he's going to save the country, you're projecting your own inability to I don't know, take control of your life or take responsibility for your life. You're projecting that capability onto Trump,
Right.
essentially. Or
Yeah,
if
I'm
you
I'm not capable. You're the capable one.
right. So you're projecting your own capacity on them, on him. And then let's say in the case of Black Lives Matter, you're projecting your own lack of self-worth onto other people and saying, well, you're the one who thinks that I'm not worth anything. You're the one who's trying to ruin my life when really it's an internal problem, an internal neurosis.
Yes, I mean, in both of those instances where you see people doing that, I would say, yeah, that's like 99% what's going on. Based on my experience working with, all kinds of people. Yeah, and I relate, I do the same things, but I'm not going to sit here and, tell you that you're right about that because you're not.
Right.
You're just saying that maybe you're saying something right. You're saying something that you need to say. And I understand that, but you're saying it in the wrong context. And you need to understand that because you sound really stupid to anybody who doesn't have the same issue that you have.
Okay. So I want to get back to a more specifically religious topic. Um, I want to go to a question that I got from Hut, our mutual friend Hut. And he's talking about Jung. And, Jung said in an interview in 1959, that he was asked if he believed that God exists, and he replied, "I don't need to believe, I know." And Jung said, something similar. And he has a quote here from Jung. After the interview, Jung expressed concern that most people thought the truth is simple and can be expressed by one short sentence. In Jung's view, the truth about God is complex, as God is a mystery whose nature is beyond comprehension. In seeking to understand God, we each create our own image of him, an image that is never entirely accurate. Jung acknowledged this about his own conception of God. Quote, "Whatever I perceive from without or within is a representation or image, caused, as I rightly or wrongly assume, by a corresponding real object. But I have to admit that my subjective image is only grosso modo identical with the object. Our images are, as a rule, of something. The God image is the expression of an underlying experience of something which I cannot attain to by intellectual means." And the question from Hud is, based on the above, can't we conclude that Jung is clearly asserting that he believes God is literally real, even though we can't comprehend God's nature? So that's part A. Part B, doesn't the distinction matter whether God is literally real or psychologically real? And then C, Mark, do you agree or disagree with Jung, assuming that you agree that Jung, believed literally in God?
Well, I mean, again, I would just kind of amalgamate what I've said throughout this discussion and say I think Jung is talking about God in a strictly psychological context. And also I think he's talking about, the phenomenon of image eruption. Like we create images to represent things that are important to us. And I think there's this concept of God or some ideal value. And we have dreams about stuff like that and we have images. And I think that's what Jung's talking about is he he gets these images, but it's not a reflection of the real thing, of the real psychological phenomenon. I mean, nothing can be. But I think the image of Jesus dying on the cross is a pretty good representation, actually, of that process and of what God is and how we come in contact with him.
So you think that Jung is not saying he literally believes in God, as let's say a Christian or a Jew might conceive of God. He's saying the image of God represents something real that we can't fully comprehend. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, Jung is saying the psyche is real.
Okay.
It's as real as you or me. It's as real as reality out there. And in a certain context, it is as important as those things. That's what he's saying. I mean, that's my interpretation. I'm sure you've read Jung's. He says one thing one page, another thing the next page. He's not the most linear guy. I think a lot of what I do is I just want to make Jung palpable, digestible for a lot of different people. Kind of saying what he was saying. But yeah, that's my interpretation of what he's saying. Not just based on that, but based on everything else that I read from him, which is, pretty much everything.
Okay.
He is
So
saying like ghosts are real. Do they exist in reality? He would never be clear on that. He would never give you the satisfaction of saying that, but he would say they're real and they matter and they need to be treated as if they are as real as a person in front of you. Now, if you're mayor of a town and you start using the ghosts that you see to inform the policy that you lay out, well, that's wrong. But that's not because the ghosts aren't real. That's because you're talking about chemistry in the context of biology. And the biologist says, wait, no, what are you talking about? These carbon atoms. It's the mitochondria. Let's just talk about the mitochondria and what it does.
okay. So
I sense
it's
you're unsatisfied by that.
no, I'm satisfied. I think though that for a lot of people, and I've had this experience in reading Jung, like you're saying, which is he doesn't necessarily give you a clear answer on, okay, are you speaking philosophically or are you speaking psychologically? And and it almost feels like that's purposely done. Like he doesn't want to take a position on the philosophy and he just wants to talk about the psychology. And I don't know if that's true. Um, but I think that's what Hutt's question here is like, does he literally believe that there's this being that exists in a supernatural realm and controls everything and created everything? And my understanding of your answer is you don't think that's what Jung is saying. He may or may not be saying that. It's hard to tell, but what he's really trying to get at is God. The God image is a representation of a psychological phenomenon, and in that sense, it is real. As a psychological object, it is real.
Hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and yeah, that's what matters. And again, like I was saying before, like religious people hear me say that and say, "Oh, you're denigrating the idea of God." And it's my challenge to them to say, "Well, that's from your worldview. That's your metaphysics putting a value on what I'm saying. But I'm asking you to adopt a different worldview to understand what I'm talking about. And I don't think you have to get rid of religion at all. I wouldn't want you to. I mean, that's
Well, I think a lot of, at least the traditional Catholics I grew up with, would say, well, that's tantamount to getting rid of it anyway. Because if you told them, well, you can keep the Mass and you can keep the sacraments and you can keep Gregorian chant and you can keep confession, but you don't have to literally believe that God is literally in some supernatural realm and he created everything and there was literally a virgin birth and there was literally a resurrection. And they would say, well, but it doesn't mean anything if that's not real. It's in vain. Like the to them, and I think it goes back
I don't
to
think it means anything if it is real. It doesn't mean anything if or if Jesus literally died, was the Son of God and died on the cross to save us from our sins. That means nothing. Because you can't do that. What relationship can you have with that? That is a dead, meaningless relationship. If you say Jesus was a guy or a collection of guys who came here and showed us a different way to live, and now we construct his story in this symbolic representation of what we all need to do to come in closer contact with God, well, that relationship has everything. That's all the meaning.
well, I think the gap that needs to be bridged there is the metaphysical one, because they would say, well, it does matter. It is meaningful if Jesus came down and died for our sins, because they have this metaphysics that, well,
All right.
sin, sin has some sort of metaphysical existence apart from you, and it creates, some sort of permanent metaphysical stain on your soul. And Christ, by dying, literally, washes that away and makes you able to be, enter into the supernatural realm. And and so I think that's where you have to, if someone accepts that as literally true and that's their metaphysics, and then you say, well, that's not true. Well, you're asking them to adopt a radically, radically different metaphysics. And you can say, well, it's still, I mean, I could see maybe appealing to someone like that and saying, but maybe look at the tangible benefits of, say, going to mass from an emotional or psychological perspective and focus on those. But I think until you find a way to bridge that metaphysical gap, um, it's there's just a chasm. There's just a chasm there because you're saying, well, the importance of religion is psychology. It's this connection with yourself, and it's you know uh, improving improving psychologically. And then someone like my old friend, who was like, well, it doesn't matter if you become a good person. That's not what this is all about. This is about, this is literally true and you need to literally follow this. And if you're miserable and hate yourself, that doesn't matter.
But I mean, even as you say that, as terrible as that sounds, I mean, it seems like a lot better than going on whatever your eat, pray, love journey. It's either that or your eat, pray, love journey. I mean, Jesus, kind of a toss up because both you're miserable.
Yeah.
You're gonna be miserable no matter what. So I don't know. I mean, from his perspective, it's totally understandable. Um,
So you work with religious people in your practice, right?
well, yeah, I mean, everybody, sure, yeah. I
Yeah.
get people who are religious or not.
Okay. And I'm curious, how do they typically see that? Like just in general, how does a religious person see what they're doing with you in relation to, their religious practice?
Um, well, I mean, if somebody comes to me to work with me, I mean, they're probably, you know, right? They're in a place where they're at least willing to entertain that their religion needs to become more psychological and their psychology needs to become more religious. So it's never really been an issue. And I've used Christian symbols to describe what somebody's going through if they're religious, and that can be really helpful. Like the apologizing to your wife or husband for something you did wrong, even though they did something wrong too, and it's really about what they did wrong. But just being able to apologize for what you did wrong. I mean, that feels like dying on a cross. I'm sure a lot of people would rather be crucified than have to admit to their wife or husband that they were wrong without bringing up the fact what they did was wrong. It just, so I think the symbols are very rich, and they can, help identify and make meaning out of the pain you're going through.
So basically you think that someone has to be open to the idea of a more psychologized religion
Yeah,
when they
well, I
come
mean,
to you.
if I get religious people coming to me, it's because like it sounds like your friend who's been saying like I've been doing my dues at this church and I'm miserable and I didn't really care, but now I have a wife and I have kids and I don't want to be miserable like my dad was. What am I missing? And
Right.
that's when I say, well, it's quite simple what you're missing. This is going to be very painful to implement. It's going to be the most painful thing, the most difficult thing you've ever done. But let's not let that obscure the fact that this is a very simple thing what we're doing.
I think you could use that to advertise to Irish Catholics. If you just tell them it's going to be the most painful, miserable, and difficult thing they've ever done, they're going to feel a lot of pain. I think that
Yeah,
would
well,
really open up
that's
the
that's my
Irish Catholic
Protestant
market.
Midwest upbringing. But it is. I mean, I don't want to. I don't. I would never want to sugarcoat that. Like this is really painful.
Yeah,
When I say difficult, I mean painful. But I mean, the pain we're talking about is just the pain of feeling certain feelings.
right.
You know, um, that's really was. No, I got to talk to my mom. Yeah, but you don't want to talk to your mom because you're afraid of how you're going to feel when she shoots you a certain expression. You're anticipating that's going to be really painful. But let's not obscure that all you're really trying to avoid is your body feeling a certain emotion. And that's what therapy is about. Therapy is about approaching the feeling or the emotion. So you're more able to approach the anchor for that feeling or emotion, your mom or whatever, your dad, girlfriend, wife.
Right. Well, so I want to go back to the image of the cross, the crucifixion, because you're talking about how, you know, creating the right relationship with your psychology, doing the work in therapy, you know, is very painful. It might feel like a crucifixion to you emotionally. And you think that the image of the cross is a really powerful symbol. And the reason I want to bring this up is I think a lot of people, Catholic or non-Catholic, Christian or non-Christian, look at the image of Christ on the cross, and to them, it symbolizes a kind of malevolent view of life, that life is about suffering, that life is not to be loved for its own sake. Because the way that the cross is mythologized in Christianity, and in particular in Catholicism, is, well, this is what life is. And, um, Christ submitted to this process because what's important is not this life, it's the next one. And you submit to the suffering in order to be rewarded in heaven. And so for a lot of people, the cross is a symbol of misery. It's a symbol of a very unhealthy way of looking at life. But you're saying, well, actually, it's a symbol for psychological transformation, and it's actually a good thing. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I actually just finished reading the Bible for the first time. Um, Took me about 10 years. And I'm reading through the New Testament, which I got through a lot quicker. And I don't see any reason why there needs to be this mind-body dichotomy, like this world is suffering. I mean, there's a few passages like that. I understand if you're Catholic, maybe you're going off of the teachings of Augustine or other Neoplatonists. But if you're just like maybe an Orthodox Christian, I don't see any reason why this world needs to be suffering. Um, but I just think that is the natural um, worldview you come to when you don't really, I mean, I'm just going to say it, when you don't have a way of dealing with your feelings. When you don't really understand what your feelings are, how they work, what they're a reflection of, and if you have one that maybe it contradicts what you're learning at church, then boy, it's really easy to come up with this worldview when you say, oh, well, that's just a feeling. That's lower. This church, this ideal thing up here is what's important, is what really matters. Um, so I mean, there's probably lots of reasons for that, but also I would just come up with, I would just say that I think one of the main reasons is we just really never had the language, the concepts to understand our feelings and what they are and what to do with them and how to talk through them and how to integrate them into our lives. When they seem to contradict what's going on around us, we just never had the language for that. And that's the job of psychology. I could totally understand that if you read the Bible and if you read like, what James talks about in the New Testament, like how to live, if you don't have a way of integrating your feelings, like, yeah, you will develop a mind-body dichotomy, not because you really believe it intellectually, but psychologically you're split, you know. And it's not just religious people who do that, like I was just talking with I forget who I was talking with, but anyways, that's kind of like your rite of passage as a philosophy undergrad is debunking Descartes and his whole mind-body problem. Like it's a foregone conclusion that he's wrong. The point of your paper is just to go through the argument of like why is he wrong? But that's all about the mind-body dichotomy. So everybody does that in whatever their 300 level philosophy class, but then you go out in the world and the mind-body dichotomy is all around you. Because I don't think it's a philosophical view. I think it's an implicit view that you take on when you really don't know, but when you fail to really demarcate philosophy and psychology and then you know uh, talk about fundamental principles for psychology and what it needs to be. um I would say, yeah, these things, they seem like a contradiction, but believe me, you start noticing your feelings, putting words to them, communicate them even, and you're going to see it's not a contradiction at all. You're probably, just trying to cover up, insecurities or something, and you don't know you're doing it.
What's not a contradiction?
Uh, but weren't you talking about like the your life versus um the some higher realm? Like you need to
Oh, well,
sacrifice
well,
yourself in this realm for the sake of another realm.
yeah, well, I was talking specifically about the symbolism of the cross because one of the things that I think, one of
Oh,
the
did I
issues
get
I
off
think,
topic? I do that, sorry.
no, you're on topic, but you're slightly off, but you're close. So, uh,
So
I
I'm
was talking
sorry,
about
say I'm
the
sorry. Ask
symbolism of
again.
the symbolism of the cross, and the reason I brought this up is I think there may be people who want to, if I'm, let's say someone like me who was a very devout Catholic, and they're like, okay, yeah, I don't literally believe in God or the resurrection. But I really do think I should cultivate maybe a healthier relationship with the religion I was brought up with because it's something that informed my existence from the time I can remember. Um, so, but if I go back to, let's say, the symbolism of the cross, that has so many negative connotations for me. To me, that's about a rejection of the world. That's about a rejection of happiness. You know, it's about a rejection of this world in favor of some other world. But you're saying, well, actually, the cross can be reconceptualized as a symbol of psychological integration.
Yeah.
And I'm just
Yeah.
curious, like, how would you make that shift, and how do you support that shift?
Okay, so yeah, I was kind of on track. I think you make that shift by identifying feelings, but by getting more nuanced about what psychology is. Because I think, this, looking at Christ on the cross as some kind of sacrifice for some other world, I don't see how that needs to be in Christianity from my perspective. I only read the Bible once. I went through with the
More than
bias.
more than most people.
Yeah. Well, I went through with the bias. That's my reading of it. I think a lot of that mind-body dichotomy worldview came afterwards, like through Augustine and other people, and just by people not really explicitly believing the mind-body dichotomy, but I mean, like, you said it, like if you doubt certain doctrines, that's a thought, but it's a feeling too. And your story of how you went to the church and talked about that, it was clear they don't know, they don't have a way of dealing with those feelings. So, you're talking about the church in year 25, I don't know, after the Council of Nicaea or whatever, then it's not going to be a big part of the church, but you just build that up over time and you don't really have a way of connecting the feeling in this world with what Christ did or some higher self. You will implicitly develop a mind-body dichotomy and think that that cross represents suffering, even though I don't think, I mean, from my view, I don't think that has to be part of the cross at all. I mean, why? Oh, it's only part of the cross because you didn't really have a good way of explicating your psychological relationship with the cross for the past. And I'm not blaming you, I'm not blaming you, but this is part of, I think, integrating religion more into society and making it more psychological.
So you would say then that the mind body dichotomy um, is a psychological fact that arises as a result
Yeah.
of your own inability to actually deal with your emotions and deal with your psychology.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and this is a big topic that I'm not really ready to talk about too much, but I'm definitely thinking about it in terms of a third book here of what I could.
Yes.
It's like the relationship between psychology and philosophy and where these really bad philosophical ideas come from. They're actually good psychological ideas. And I
Yeah.
think when people talk about, like I've said before, like Plato or anybody else.
Okay. Well, so on that note, I want to dive in a little bit more into both symbolism and ritual in a religious context. Um, how would you define a religious symbol, and how do you think religious symbols arise? Like, how do you think people end up creating religious symbols that are so psychologically meaningful, and yet the people who create them don't necessarily know what they really mean psychologically? How does that process happen?
I think it's like, one of those things that just kind of happens on its own. It's like, well, how does your eye see? Like when if you're a child, how do you train your eye to see? It's like it just kind of does what it does. And I think humans just have a way of expressing externally things that really matter to them through these symbols. I mean, maybe we get them through dreams. You just maybe get them through some active reverie. Um, yeah, I mean, that's one of those things. I don't know. I just think that's a process that happens. Like and maybe because connection is so important for humans and their psychological health. We can't just take something. That's why I said, like, how did religion start? Yeah, it could be that bone flute ceremony. It could be two people having the same dream on the same night with the same symbol. Uh, they can feel the dreams, right? I mean, that can be a really powerful thing. And yeah, we just have to express what's going on in us, and we have to put it in a way where other people can understand it. And I think symbols are how we do that. And I don't know if I need to defend that so much, but just, look at people's response to Jesus on the cross, or just a cross. That's all you need to do. And, you look at a 4-year-old, drawing, and, she'll draw crosses or a flower, or uh, these cross symbols, these mandalas, mandala. I think that's actually the wrong pronunciation, but I just say mandala.
Yeah, I think it is mandala, but mandala sounds better to me. So,
Yeah, it really does. And
so,
did,
so a
did, did that
reli
answer the question? Does
yes. So to answer the second part, I think I made the mistake of asking two questions in one. So I
okay.
was asking you, how do symbols form? But the first part of that was, what would you describe? How would you define a religious symbol?
A religious symbol is an external representation of an archetypal image, of an image that tells us what we need to do as humans to live well. That's what an archetype is. It's like I describe archetypes like if we were prairie dogs. If prairie dogs developed the ability to have language, their archetypes would be somebody who's really good at hunting mice, or somebody who's really good at calling out to the rest of the prairie dogs, when a hawk comes by. Those are things, those are symbols, those are ways of being that matter to them, that inform who they are, that are really just a part of who they are as a species. And those symbols won't change until they become another species. And I think it's a very fascinating process. How I can't explain it, but yeah, these images just erupt, and they seem to indicate the same thing for a lot of different people, like the cross and mandala. Now I'm confused myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a very
Hmm.
complicated idea, and we just need ways of simplifying these things that really matter. And I think that the cross does a great job of doing that. I mean, I'm not Catholic, but I walk into a Catholic church and I say, yeah, this is about as good a representation as you could give for the inside of a human mind. This is what it looks like. If we could just like paint it, articulate it in artistic form, art is taking the intellectual and making it visceral. This is the most visceral artistic way you could portray the human mind.
I think that's entirely true. And
But it's no different than like if you have grief, part of that grief is being able to share it with somebody else. You gotta put words to that grief and talk about it with somebody else. And I think our symbol creation process is that exactly. It's like it's just that same impetus, like these things that they need to be shared because we need to be conscious, and we can't be conscious of it if we're just by ourselves. We can't be conscious of the storm god if we're just sitting there in our tent at night going, "Oh boy, I really hope a storm doesn't come." Then you just become, obsessive compulsive. You gotta
yeah,
circle up with everybody, play the flute, look at Steve. You've been having, a fight with Steve because whatever, he's the hotshot new hunter, and you're old, but there's needs to be some, recognition there. If you're going to work together.
interesting. So, related question to symbolism. What is a ritual?
That's related to symbolism.
I mean, from my perspective, maybe it's not. I mean, I would love to get your perspective. What
Well, I
is
mean, I have
what
a
is a ritual?
I have my own definition of ritual because, I just describe, it's like psychology versus philosophy. Um, there's this behavior, there's this behavior that you have that maybe you don't like or maybe you do, but there is a process, there's a psychological process that leads to that behavior. And if that behavior is something that you don't like or is destructive to you, then okay, I guess the best way to describe it is in terms of a routine. Like a routine is you're just trying to change the behavior, right? Like, oh, I got to work out more. I only go to the gym once a week. I want to go 3 times a week. That's a routine. A ritual is working on focusing on the emotional issue that makes it so you only work out once a week as opposed to 3 times. Like you're heavy, there's emotional baggage there. Maybe you want to get back at your dad. You have resentment against the world. So like, who cares how good of shape I'm in anyways? Ritual is working on that emotional issue. So you're lighter, metaphorically, and now you can move, right? You're able to move and do what you want to do. Routine is focusing on the endpoint. Ritual is focusing on, well, let's look at the unconscious emotional mismanagement that makes you heavy in the first place, psychologically.
So a ritual is basically a process, or it's a routine focused on your psyche, focused on explicating what's going on in your psyche.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Looking at feelings that you repress or feelings are there, but you don't really identify. Um, a ritual would focus on, you're at a dinner party and somebody says something that really bothered you. And in the moment, you don't say anything, you just kind of freeze up. A ritual would involve going back and looking at, what was that? What was that feeling I had? Why did I repress it? What was that anxiety that represses it? A routine would be, yeah, I'm gonna, try to say whatever I want at the next dinner party, telling you to change the behavior, which can work. And if a routine works, that's great. Then you don't need to see a therapist. You don't have a psychological issue. Most issues you have, you don't need to see a therapist for. You can just change. But sometimes, you try to change and it doesn't work, or usually just, you just get more stressed out and it gets worse. Then it's okay. How am I mismanaging my emotions that lead me to this place where if I'm at a dinner party and somebody says something I disagree with, I just kind of freeze up and turn into myself and then like complain about it to my wife afterward, you know?
So that's a ritual, from a therapist perspective or a psychological perspective. What is a ritual religiously? Like specifically, I'm thinking, if I'm a Catholic, the ritual of the Mass, or or what's another example of a religious ritual? But any kind of process where a bunch of people get together and they perform this ceremony. They go through these actions that are ritually prescribed. What's going on there psychologically? What is that?
Hmm. I don't know. I've not been a part of too many religious rituals, to be honest. So I can't really say. Well, with mass, I'd have a intellectual answer to this. Jung talks about mass and how it's a representation of the individuation process. Um, that's his point. I mean, I can see where it's coming from. I can't say for sure. So I don't know. Maybe mass is just a way to get in touch symbolically with this thing that we all need to do to grow. And maybe when you take in the symbol of individuation, it helps you live it in your life. I would imagine it does to some degree.
So a ritual then could be just sort of a ceremonial engagement with symbols of
Yeah, yeah.
transformation, to
Something that's
borrow Jung's
important,
phrase.
something that is as important to you as the symbol of the prairie dog that calls out when a hawk comes by. It's like, oh yeah, that's important. That's part of who I am. That's why I'm here, is to engage with that symbol. Either be that prairie dog or listen and understand and see why it really matters. And I would say that's what's trying to be communicated through the mass. I come at this from I think I'm just built to be an atheist. That was my orientation. Like when I first, wanted to be confirmed, um, it just seemed like I didn't, what are you talking about? And so a lot of what I mean maybe saying here is just me really trying to make sense out of these things that I have never been part of. I never really understood.
So, you just talked about a ritual in a psychological context, and we just talked about a ritual in a religious context. If What's the value? Because I'm trying to think, I have been drawn to, since becoming an atheist, I'm still drawn to churches emotionally. I'm still drawn to the mass emotionally. Um, and in fact, I was visiting my parents for Christmas, and I went Christmas night after the family get together. I went to a church, and I just sat in there, and I just enjoyed the ambiance basically. I just sat in the pews, and it was a really nice experience. And I've thought about, potentially going to mass and just saying, well, how does that affect me psychologically? But what am I getting psychologically out of, let's say going to mass? What what's the positive psychological impact of doing that? And how would it have a positive psychological impact?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think in your case, I would have to guess, because you come from that's part of your background. It's like a way of connecting with your family or looking at where you've come. And I don't know. It could be that, but it could just be, what I was saying before about I think of the inside of a Catholic church is like the inside of a mind, and in some way you kind of just get that. It's like when you look at Jesus on the cross and you kind of just get like, yeah, if I want to grow, I need to splay myself out like that without a hint of resentment or a hint of like, well, look at you and what you're doing. Just like that's what I need to do. And I think when you go inside, at least when, now I'm talking about myself, when I go inside of a church, even though don't have that emotional connection to my childhood or growing up as a Catholic, because I never did, but I don't know. I just kind of think like, yeah, this is kind of what we've decided what our mind is and how we relate with it. Now, it's not perfect, and it's taken thousands of years. So a lot of these ideas and a lot of these symbols were developed and communicated at a time when, nobody really knew how to read. And like this is just our way of doing it. And I'm happy to be part of it, whatever that means. It's like why I vote. I don't think voting matters. No, wait. Your vote doesn't matter, but voting matters. It's like yeah, it's stupid, but I'm still gonna go to the polls and just like, vote for somebody and I don't know. It's like I gotta be part of humanity. And I think that's a real challenge sometimes is being part of humanity. And I think the representation of the psyche in church helps you do that. I'm guessing, I don't.
Well, one of the reasons I ask is, I want to come back to the point of like when you say that psychology can't replace religion, um, I really want to hone in on what exactly that means practically and concretely for an individual person. So, I want to obviously grow psychologically. I want to become a more developed person. I want to become more integrated. And, let's say I work with you as a therapist, and I submit to this process. Um, and then you tell me, okay, but um, this process, what you're doing with me, that doesn't replace religion. So what does that mean concretely? I mean, are you telling me that to be psychologically healthy or to be a complete person, I need to engage with a religion in some way.
Oh boy, yeah. I would never, you know, the difficulty with answering that is that's like very abstract. And if we're talking about me dealing with somebody in the clinic, it just has to be concrete and I have to know like what you're going through. I mean, typically what I tell people is, look, integrate the religion as much as you want. You decide. You decide what that needs to look like for you. I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about your relationship with your mom. Let's look at the feelings there, what they are, how you can put words to them, how you can use those feelings and the integration of those feelings to create a better relationship with your mom. And then you tell me what happens when you go to church. You tell me what you need to do when it comes to going to church. Unless an emotional issue comes up, unless you're talking with the priest and he says something that pisses you off. Okay, now let's work on that emotion. Let's put words to it. Let's use it to develop so you can develop a personality, create a better relationship with that one particular priest. You tell me the dream you have afterward. You tell me. And I think that's really, I think, what religion is supposed to be. It's you go into your unconscious and tell me what you see. And please, for the sake of you, for the sake of humanity, you need to communicate what you see as well as you possibly can so I can understand it. As opposed to what religion has been, which is here's what matters, here's how you talk about it, here's how you relate with it. And yeah, there's another area to dig over there. Yeah, don't go digging over there. There's nothing we checked. There's nothing over there. Don't go.
Checked.
Right. And
Yeah.
it just needs to become this more personal issue. And that's really why I want to help people who are religious and are going to be religious forever. That's fine. I just want you to create your own relationship with the church.
So I can understand that, in a at a let's say a clinical level. But let's actually let's remove it from that particular situation, from that context, and just say, because I one thing I am struggling to understand, and I think other viewers might struggle to understand this as well, is why can't psychology replace, let's say, why can't psychology replace religion? And in what way can it not replace it? Because you've said, and I remember in a specific video where you talked about toxic theology, you said, well, you can't psychology can't replace religion, and if someone says that, then they don't understand religion or psychology. And so I'm just curious, what is it that religion is doing that psychology is not, and why do we need that?
Yeah, I can't really say except that I know a lot of people, it seems really important for them to go to mass. I I think you can do through psychology everything that you do through religion. But then I think there's still religion. It just becomes a different thing. It just becomes um you relating with yourself in a healthier way. That's your religious experiences is your own relation, your own meaning that you make of your life as you integrate parts of yourself that are there, but you don't really see them right now. So,
Okay,
yeah,
so
I don't go to church. I don't do anything religious. I go to a group therapy, and a lot of people talk about God. It's actually part of a church. So it's like my way of going, and I go to and people talk about God and Jesus, and I just went and I just translate that in my mind. But I'm there. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm totally there, and I'm part of it. Is it religious? Is it psychology? Yeah. Plus, I'm not like the most artistic person. And I think as long as you have people drawing icons of Jesus, that's going to be religion. even if he has all the same views of Jesus as I do, I think religion is just this artistic representation of this of our psyche.
Okay, so
Maybe.
I think I might be getting at what you're saying. So psychology is the field of study of, you know, how the psyche works, you know, how to change behaviors, how to create better relationships with other people and with yourself, etc. So psychology is this field of study with fundamental principles. Um, and then therapy is is the application of that to actual individual people. It's how you apply those principles in your
It's
life.
how you actually go about relating with yourself in a healthier way.
Right. And then religion, it sounds like religion is, it sounds like there's not a clear distinction in between, at least according to what I'm hearing, there's not a clear distinction between religion and therapy. It's almost, you might say maybe religion is an outgrowth of good therapy. If you do good therapy and you create a better relationship with yourself, then you will create symbols or rituals that are would be considered religious. You know, maybe you adopt the symbol of the cross or you invent your own symbol, but that is what you're calling religion. It's this a sort of a concrete manifestation of the better relationship you're creating with yourself through therapy.
Yeah, yeah, sure. It's like, um, yeah, but you do that a bunch of times. Yeah, one guy does that a bunch of times, and everybody else does that a bunch of times, and you start noticing patterns. You start noticing similarities. You start saying, "Oh, yeah, you keep drawing this cross that's spinning like a tornado." You know, you take you take too many mushrooms and you close your eyes and there's two of those, spinning in opposite directions. Oh yeah, I have that too. Hmm. Let's build, let's just build something that that commemorates the fact that we both had this same vision. And then somebody else walks around and goes, "Oh, you guys, I had that same vision too. What does this mean? Let's talk about it. Let's relate with each other." And then it just turns into the church. It turns into the inside of a cathedral. You go into Notre Dame, you're like, where am I? What universe is this? It's your unconscious. So maybe you could say religion is yeah, I mean, I guess I've used this analogy, which I was trying to explain before, but I guess I wasn't doing really well, is yeah, you're at an archaeological dig. Your religion is you don't have to dig, we've already dug. Here's the symbols, here's what it means. Psychology is you kind of dig and see what you bring up. Therapy is giving you the tools so you can dig on your own. And maybe a healthier religion would be, bringing your artifact up, talking with Steve about his artifact, going like, how are these similar? Maybe it doesn't matter, but the point is we're talking about it. What does it mean when Jesus cuts down the fig tree or whatever? I don't know. I think it's just important to talk about.
So it almost sounds like the way that you're conceptualizing religion is it's like a subcomponent of therapy.
I think people's true religious experiences that they're going to have in their life is going to come as the outcrop of therapy. I mean, not that you need to go to therapy explicitly, but it's about taking these unconscious issues and connecting them with people around you who matter to you in a new way. That is going to be your religious experience in your life. And I think, maybe going to mass, hearing hearing the priest say something in a certain way, it's maybe going to click and give you something similar to that. But I think the real religious experience you're going to have is taking these things that you've never, half the time you don't even know you have them, really uncomfortable parts about you, and integrating them into your personality through creating a better relationship with the people who matter to you. That's going to be your religious experience. When people feel that, I think that's really what's going on. And you create a church like this and you go through these rituals like mass. And I think, the best way I can describe it is that's just people taking those unconscious parts of themselves and talking about it with their good friend Steve or their wife, doing that for 40,000 years. I think the end result is the inside of Notre Dame. Now, there's a lot of bad ideas caught up in there too, because of these things that we already talked about, the inability to properly delineate between psychology and philosophy. And when you're talking about one versus the other, like if you're talking about Trump or Black Lives Matter, what are you talking about? There's been a lot of confusion, which makes people get to the place where they're like, oh yeah, Jesus means sacrifice, and it means that this world is terrible and you need to live to another world. I don't see that anywhere. Why does that have to be a part of it? I think you're coming away from what the symbol really means.
Interesting. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit because this is a topic I want to cover before we end. I want to talk a little bit about modern atheism and what the issues are with modern atheism because people talk about the new atheists and they were very negative towards religion. Um, just saw it as a massive superstition with no value at all, and in fact, negative value in essentially every facet. Um, and that's sort of the stereotype of the modern atheist. It just hates religion, doesn't see any value in it, thinks we would all be better off if we just got rid of it. What's your take on modern atheism?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the other side of your buddy who's talking to you and saying like it doesn't matter, if you're happy, like, describing to these doctrines or these rituals, it's just about doing them. I think a lot of atheism is people who are, built like me, and they try to find meaning in religion, and they just get people like your friend, and they rebel against that, and they end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater because the baby is the truth and the bathwater is bad ideas or ideas that fundamentally disconnect you from yourself. It's good in that it's somebody saying that there's some kind of truth out there. Like the truth exists out there and we need to ascribe to that. But, I think that's part of our philosophical issue that we're working through in the West is how do we get to truth without supernaturalism, without religion? How do we get to truth while staying grounded in reality? And we because of that split, you have, your buddy at church, and but the other side of that split is the atheist. You say, well, clearly you're wrong, right? Because y your defense of rights is God, and I know God doesn't exist. Like I know, the flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist. I know that's wrong, so rights must not be real, and let's have communism or something, right? So I think it's just one side of the split between fact and truth that we have in our culture now, and we're trying to reconcile, and you see that everywhere, Democrats, Republicans. That's fact and truth
So what do you mean by
personified.
what do you mean by fact versus truth? What's the difference there?
Um, well, fact would be just a basic perceptual observation of reality. Like that wall is white. The truth would be some kind of guiding principle that I can live by that is based on, ideally based on who I am. It's like a fact that's relevant and usable. And I would argue we get that through integration. But when you integrate and you don't really know that you're integrating, and plus you have this thing called religion already telling you what truth is, from a time in your life from before you could even develop these truths on your own. Um, it becomes difficult to differentiate between those two. And and this is the argument between Democrats, Republicans, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson. They're never going to agree because they have a fundamentally disconnected worldview. Sam Harris thinks that only this world matters, but there's really no such thing as truth. And Jordan Peterson thinks that only truth matters, even if it's disconnected from reality.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're getting at the empiricism, rationalism
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
that's what this is.
debate. Yeah.
Yeah, and these two fields of thought and throughout philosophy, I mean, from before Socrates, and I would argue, and probably I'm going to argue something in my third book about like, yeah, I think one of the reasons why we can't reconcile this is because we're actually not talking about one field. We're talking about two fields. And you don't really know when you're talking about one or the other. And that's the problem. It's
Interesting.
like, is the mitochondria, is this biological thing in the cell, or is it just a collection of atoms, of certain elements oriented in a certain way?
So it also sounds like what you're saying with, the problem with modern atheism is that, it looks at the fact that it goes, okay, well, religion is philosophically false, but not realizing that there are important psychological truths.
I'm sorry. Religion is philosophically false. Yeah,
So,
you're right.
so it sounds like that's what you're saying the issue with modern
It took me a
atheism.
while. Yeah.
You're saying that they go, oh, well, obviously God's not real, and a virgin birth didn't happen, and resurrection can't happen.
Yeah, that's how I was.
Yeah, but they're missing the
And then I went
important
to
thing.
when I went to the minister to talk with him about it, and I mean, it was a pretty liberal church, but he's like, yeah, that's a good point. But nobody was saying these are actually symbolic representations of things that really matter to us. And it's just kind of frustrating, I guess, that wasn't communicated, even though there's this really smart guy, Jung, who did. I mean, people always criticize him for being a little vague sometimes, and I understand that he is, but given what he's trying to talk with you about, I think he's very clear. I mean, this is my challenge in my life is how do you communicate abstract ideas to people in a way that really matters? It's tough.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's we're about 2 hours in, so I think that covers most of my questions. Um, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I feel like I
Yeah,
got a
thank you.
lot out of it. Hopefully, viewers and listeners will get as much out of it as I did. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything you wanna leave with?
Uh, no, just, keep digging into your unconscious and if you do something that you don't really want to do, if something's going on. If there's like a roadblock in your life where you feel stuck or you feel like there's no way out or it's hopeless, you got to keep going and I encourage you to look at what's going on there and see it. And you can call it psychology, you can talk with people and call it religion. It's just about creating a better relationship with whatever that thing is that's perceptively holding you back.
Okay. Well, we'll wrap it up there. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like and subscribe to the Reason and Reverence channel. And also, I would recommend heading on over to, is it joinanimus.com?
Yeah, joinanimus.com.
Joinanimus.com. If you're interested in what Mark does and think maybe you need some help from Mark, I would encourage you to go to joinanimus.com and book a call. You still do calls, right?
Yeah, yeah, I love talking to people. I do consultations and just see what's up.
Okay. All
People
right.
use that like consultation as like a euphemism for like a sales call. You just want to talk about what's going on. I'll steer you in the best way possible. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I can vouch that it's definitely not a sales call. Um, you've never been in sales, have you, Mark?
No, I
Okay,
mean,
I can't see you being in sales. I'm gonna be honest. I can't see you being good at
thanks. Yeah,
that.
I'm probably, bad at that. But that's my thing. I mean, that's my story, right? Like I picked up philosophy when I was 16 and I fell off the face of the earth and now that's part of my story is coming back and talking with people about it. So hopefully it helps.
All right. Well, we'll sign off there. And yeah, like I said, either go to joinanimus.com. Also, please subscribe to the Reason and Reverence channel, and we'll see you guys next time.